Since the documentary Leaving Neverland aired this year, it has created lots of controversy. After watching the program myself, I was shocked on how it was possible that someone so loved by the world could have possibly done anything like this and got away with it for so long. The world seems divided on the issue. Did Michael Jackson, the king of pop, really commit these horrible crimes towards children? Or are James Safechuck, Wade Robson, Jordan Chandler and Brett Barnes all lying? And have they been lying all along just to make some money? To be honest, I wasn't a big fan of Jackson's music, but I did like a couple of his songs. It was hard for me to understand why and how someone so much in the public eye could have been able to get away with doing something so heinous, so I decided to take a closer look. I tried to remain neutral, so not as a fan of Michael Jackson nor as someone out to condemn him. I looked into this simply as the parent of a young child. If someone so trusted and loved by the world could abuse a child, who can we really trust, and is it possible to see the signs when it's happening right in front of us? I would like to hope I would be able to. I wanted to look more into how to recognize the signs of child abuse and how to prevent it even from starting. To do that, I needed to look into the behavior patterns of a child abuser.
How did you get them alone?
Grooming. I would check out their family situation. I would check out their clothing to see how well they were, financially. I would check out their social interaction with other kids. When we were on the ballparks or on the gym floor, I would make sure which ones I wanted to molest. I would give them special attention, congratulate them, talk to them when I know that I would never be allowed to talk to anybody else. Aside from everybody, I would give them the attention that an official is not supposed to give anybody, and it made them feel like, wow, he's paying me attention. It is a direct form of grooming.
Were there certain characteristics that you looked for in children before molesting them?
In children, yes, but more I also looked at their families. If I thought the father was a threat, I would not approach the child. If I thought that the child had friends that he would tell, I would not approach him. If I thought the child had friends that were in the same capacity he was, I would approach him. For the simple fact that if I could molest him, I could lure him into believing, grooming him into believing that he would enjoy it. And therefore, I could manipulate him into having his other friends come and be molested by me as well.
So perhaps a child that doesn't really have a whole lot of friends, maybe not really a strong family, things like that.
Yes, no spiritual values, weak in education, needs help in many ways, even from split parenting, has a mother who may be having problems with the family, well, here comes superhero in to help out, wow, well, thank you very much. No problem. You ever need me to take them away for the night so you can have a night out? No problem. It works.
I watched Neverland a few times, paying attention to what was being said by the victims and their families. One of the first questions I asked myself was, how did the parents miss all the warning signs? From watching the mothers in the Leaving Neverland documentary, it seems to me that they chose to ignore the big warning signs. Maybe because they were smitten by the perceived status of this iconic figure. They certainly believed that Jackson could help to promote their children's future careers in the world of entertainment. As I watched the interview, I was shouting to myself, how could anyone miss the massive warning signs that were so obvious and blatant? Someone said to me, I've heard many people say this, that Jackson regarded himself as a child within a man's body. This being the case, Does that mean he needed to sleep in the same bed as young boys and behind a locked door? As a parent, and with the hindsight of what we know now, I don't think that was right, and it amounted to very suspicious behaviour on Jackson's side. Whether he had the mental age of a child or not, the parents still allowed, in all innocence, their little child to sleep in the same bed as a 40-year-old man. Not just a 40-year-old man, but a man they didn't really know. The parents seem to have let this happen because of his status. They trusted the pop persona without knowing the real Jackson. They had seen him so much on TV, and their children loved Jackson. They felt like they already knew him personally, but in reality they didn't know him at all. Jackson was, arguably, the biggest star in the world, and due to his influence and charisma, the parents were easily blindsided and never really thought about the signs that were right in front of their faces. Such is people's desire to be close to fame. Think about it. Would you let your child sleep in the same bed as a fully grown man? Someone you'd only met about a few days ago? If you're anything like me, your answer would be no straight away. No question, just a straight no, and that's the end of it. But such is the power of stardom and celebrity.
Yes.
Is there a pattern of behavior that indicates that they might be being groomed prior to being abused, other than going through the act and then having a way to prevent it?
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, there are definitely red flags that we talk about to look for. You know, if an adult wants to spend time with your kid, for example, alone, you want to know why, and you want to question that. And you know, I once gave a speech to a parent group about protecting kids, and afterwards, a group of moms who all lived in the same area came up to me to ask me a question at the end, and they said, "Look, our kids all play in the same baseball team, our boys, and we have a great coach. He really loves the kids." But there's one thing that bothers us, is that on Friday nights, he wants to host a party at his apartment and have all the boys come over to his apartment and have a pizza party. But we know that's a little creepy. We're not okay with that because, you know, we're moms and, you know, we do have that sense of safety. So what we do is we have the parties at our homes so we can keep an eye on him. And so we alternate week to week, and on Friday nights, who's going to have the pizza party? What do you think about that? I said, well, let me ask you a couple questions. I said, does this coach have a kid on the team? No. I said, okay. Is he married? No. I said, okay. So you have this adult male who wants to spend his Friday nights with your boys, and you know that it's so weird that you give up your Friday nights as adult nights so that you can keep an eye on this guy because you're afraid he might be molesting your kids? I said, my opinion, the only reason this man wants to spend his Friday night with your kids, I don't care how cute you think they are, it's to have sex with them. So, yeah, there are behaviors, and sometimes they're right in front of our faces, but we don't want to see them because it's too hard. You know, it's easy to talk about that if someone makes you uncomfortable, remove them from your kid's life. Well, what if it's your brother or your father or the uncle or your priest or your rabbi, someone who you trust and who you love and you can never think could be capable of such a thing? You're really tested, but you always have to remember, you have responsibility to protect your kids. There is no second chance there.
Why didn't the victims come forward earlier? Actually, 2 victims did come forward soon after it happened to them, but they were not believed. As horrible as it may sound, it is common for victims to not come forward. There are many reasons, including that of not being believed. There are, of course, parallels with the Jimmy Savile cases. Jackson was accused of sexual impropriety with boys on 2 separate occasions when he was alive. Jimmy Savile was also accused of similar activity while he was alive, but again his accusers weren't believed. Like Jackson, this was largely due to his apparent social standing. Some victims don't come forward, out of fear that they won't be believed. In the case of James and Wade, the reason they waited until recently to come forward was not because they were scared of not being believed, but because they were scared that they would be believed. Jackson had told both young boys that if anyone were to find out about what they were doing, their lives would be over and they would all go to jail for life. Such is the impression an adult can make on a child. So much the greater when the adult wields so much influence over a wider audience. James and Wade both admitted that, at the time, they loved Jackson. They were conditioned, persuaded, and thereby groomed to believe that Jackson was their friend and that they were made for each other. Of course, the darker side of the grooming process is to persuade the victims that they will be partly, if not entirely, to blame if it was to go wrong. So powerful is the groomer's conditioning of the person's mind that the victims often believe this well into adulthood. Safechuck later said, "I find it hard to be angry at other people. I'd almost be excited to be angry at anyone else, because that would feel healthy. But I still feel like it was my fault." They trusted Jackson, and he looked after and gave them everything they wanted. What child wouldn't want a friend like that? With Jackson, it was Christmas every day. In my experience, most 7-year-olds still believe in Santa Claus, so why wouldn't they believe anything that their hero had to say? The way James and Wade saw it at the time was that they were protecting their magical friend. At 7 years of age, they wholly believed him when he told them that if anyone were to find out what they had been doing, they would be separated, sent to jail, and would lose everything. It makes sense as to why they didn't say anything, even to the point of lying on the witness stand. Such was the influence of Michael Jackson. I began to wonder if there is a pattern to child grooming. Looking into this, I can say yes, there is often a very common pattern in child sex abuse cases.
Now, to define what grooming is, if any of you are thinking it has something to do with hair, that is not the case. What grooming is the process by which a sexual predator gains the trust of a child or their family in order to start a sexual relationship with a child in secret. The first stage of grooming is identifying the victim. As a sexual predator, they could pick this based on the age or the way a child or teen or adult looks, or it could even just be vulnerable traits. It could be that the parents aren't around. It could be that we have really low self-esteem or have just moved there and are trying to make friends. There could be a lot of different reasons and ways that they identify a victim.
So Michael was still in Australia and asked if he could send a crew to our house to film Jimmy. So a crew came.
I sat on the bed and put all his memorabilia there, and they just interviewed me. Now that I look back on it, it's almost like an audition for him. He sends this film crew out.
And the second stage is gaining trust and access. And I don't want you to think that when someone's trying to gain our trust or access to us, that it's going to be done in an overt fashion. Often, the sexual predators are very suave and smooth and may just offer a helping hand. Like, oh, I'll help put your bag in the bus for you. I'll help your mom load up the soccer balls from the soccer game. Or, oh, I'll come over and help tutor you for that. They'll try to do small things that seem quote unquote normal in relationships as a way to gain your trust. And so know that this isn't an overt action. This isn't something that we may notice right away, but it's done as a way to help our parents trust them if we're a child, and that's how they gain access to us, or have us trust them so that they're like a normal adult in our, unit, whether it's our family and extended family and friends. We think of them in a very trusting and normal fashion.
Nobody can befriend him. He has to befriend people. He's unapproachable. So for him to want to be our friend was, oh my God, how lucky are we?
The third stage is becoming important to the child or adult and giving them something that they need. This could be through manipulation, by telling the person that they're the only one that understands them and they're the only one that can help them. This could also be with children. They find they give them a lot of gifts. Maybe it's money to go get candy. Maybe it's a toy that they couldn't get otherwise, or certain equipment they needed for sports that their parents couldn't afford. They'll try to give them something or become so important and necessary in this person's life that they feel like they can't live without them, or that they need to keep them around.
He told me that I was going to be this massive film director, you know, bigger than Spielberg. He was telling me to keep working on my dancing, keep training. You know, you're going to come back out here soon, and, you know, you got to be ready for us to change the world.
I was really into jewelry, and he would reward me with jewelry for doing sexual acts for him. He would say that I need to sell him some.
The fourth stage is they will begin isolating you, meaning that they may offer you a ride home. Let's say it's a child that we're talking about, and their parents always like to pick them up from school. They'll offer to call the parent and take them home instead. Or if you're an adult, they may say, oh, I'll walk you home. It's really late. That's kind of scary. I'd rather be with you. And they do this so that you are obviously isolated. You're with them and you're more vulnerable in those positions. So just be cautious about who you spend time with when there's no one else around.
He and Wade would avoid me. I could tell they were avoiding me. You know, it's a big place. It's 2,700 acres. And they'd take off for the day, and I'd spend all day looking for them. Couldn't find them.
Our room started to get further and further away from Michael's room. And when I asked about it, we weren't even on the same floor now. I asked in Paris, and I asked about that, and they said, we couldn't get you a suite close to Michael. No suites available. This is where we could get you the nicest room. Oh, that made sense to me, so okay. But in Germany, we were like really far away from them. And same thing. We couldn't get you a suite near them.
The fifth stage is they'll begin creating secrecy around the relationship. This could be anything from no one would understand what you're going through, or I wouldn't tell anybody that. They'll start to think that you're weird or odd or crazy, or that something's wrong with you. They may also threaten to harm themselves or a pet or someone else that you love in your life if you shared any of the private information you've talked about, or the relationship as a whole. They'll threaten harm or revealing secrets as a way to keep you tied to the relationship.
You know, as soon as the cop started asking me these questions, the first thing that came to mind for me was everything that Michael started saying to me when I was 7. You know, if anyone ever found out that we were doing any of these sort of things, these sexual things, that he and I would go to jail for the rest of our lives. It was terrifying.
The sixth stage is sexualizing the relationship. And just like we talked about before when it comes to gaining trust, this won't always be done in an overt way at the beginning. But even the smallest thing, like putting an arm over the shoulder, may give the predator some kind of sexual gratification. And these first stages of sexualizing the relationship could just be putting a hand on the knee, rubbing them on the back, you know, linking arms and walking together. It could be things that we don't consider to be sexualized, but the predator is taking it that way. They will also set up scenarios where it's normal to be naked around one another, such as getting ready to go swimming, or being in a locker room and changing before or after a game, or even going to a spa. They'll set up these types of scenarios so that you become desensitized to being naked around them because you don't think it's something that makes you vulnerable or is dangerous. In the last portion of this stage, if this is a child that is the victim, they will play on a normal child's curiosities and questions about the body and use that to further the sexual relationship and move it into actual sexual touch.
Michael and I were in his room. He set it up like, I'm gonna show you something that everybody does and you'll really enjoy it. So it was like he was teaching you something new. And I remember my penis swelling up because I did it so much that first time. I must have done it a few times. It felt like you were bonding in a way.
And the seventh and final stage of grooming is controlling the relationship. Because once the sexual abuse is happening, all of the things that they've set up, they'll use that as leverage to keep us held in that relationship, whether it's financial, Remember I said they might buy us gifts or give us things we couldn't otherwise get for ourselves? It could be that they have more power over us because they're a boss or a teacher or someone in our life who can, harm us in such a way. It could also be emotional support. Remember, if they're telling us that they're the only ones that can understand us and everybody else will think something's wrong with us. They've tried to keep everything we do together a secret. And because of all of that swirling around, there can be so much shame associated with this. Because at this point, the person who's been groomed feels like they're unlovable or that they should be embarrassed and they brought this on themselves. But I want you to know that that is not the case. All of these different stages are stages of manipulation.
He would run drills with me where we'd be in the hotel room and he would pretend like somebody was coming in and you had to get dressed as fast as possible without making noise. So not getting caught was a big, just kind of fundamental. It was very much a secret, and he would tell me that if anybody found out, his life would be over and my life would be over. And that's something he tells you over and over again. He said that I was his first sexual experience, and he would say that all the time. He's the biggest entertainer and he's a creative genius, and that creative genius thinks that you're special. What's not to like? Right?
As I reach the end of my research into Michael Jackson and his child abuse, I can't help being more and more moved in the direction of saying that he was a clever and devious person who was able to manipulate the whole world into thinking he was an amazing, lovable man, but who possessed a childlike simplicity in his understanding of the world. One of his victims said, "The abuse didn't feel strange, because he was like a god." Jackson was so well loved and had so much power over people that he was able to get away with anything, no matter what evidence was presented against him. I'm sure that even if a video of Michael Jackson abusing these children were to be found, I know that many of his fans would say that it had been photoshopped or video edited. There is so much evidence pointing towards Jackson having committed these crimes, but there is very little that points to him being innocent. I would like to put this to you. Say you were a billionaire and you were to be accused of sexually abusing a young child. Would you A, pay a lot of money to someone who demands it and who is willing to lie to get it off of you? Or B, say, hell no, you're not getting a penny off of me. I'm innocent. Go ahead and take me to court, because there will be no evidence. There can't be any evidence, because I didn't do anything wrong. In my opinion, Jackson paid up far too quickly and even offered the victim's father a 2-movie deal and a large amount of money, which the parents quickly turned down. So who was lying? Is it all of the victims and all of the witnesses, or is it Michael Jackson? Has he had us all fooled from the start? Let's have a closer look at the real Michael Jackson. According to J. Randy Taraborelli, a childhood friend, Jackson lied about his father being abusive and his apparent bad upbringing.
Michael Jackson has spent years and years bemoaning his childhood. Have you seen my childhood? Constantly lamenting his childhood. But yet there are a lot of people who abuse who don't turn out like Michael Jackson. A lot of people who are very famous, who don't turn out like Michael Jackson. There was a time when he was young when Joe raised his hand to Michael. When Michael took a strong position against it and said, if you hit me or ever hit me again, I'm just not going to sing again. And that hit Joe in a place that he firmly understood. Because Joe understood more than anyone that Michael Jackson was the power behind the five. And then if Michael decided he wasn't going to sing again, that could be the end of everything.
Also, according to his childhood friend, the Michael Jackson we all saw on TV and read about in the newspapers was a creation made up by Michael Jackson himself. Can we really trust someone who has lied so much over the years about his whole life, even going as far as to create his own award for the President of the United States to present to him? All of this points to Jackson already being a serial liar and a narcissist. We have previously seen what money and a good lawyer can do for you in the case of O.J. Simpson. I wonder how many people believed and still believe that O.J. Simpson committed 2 counts of murder. Due to the fact that he had a lot of money and a very good lawyer, he may have actually got away with murder. Well, in a criminal court anyway. Simpson was later found liable in a civil court, where he was required to pay a lot of money in compensation. Michael Jackson's lawyer was so good that he was able to get Mike Tyson off the allegations of the battery and rape of his girlfriend. Let's have a quick look at Jackson's lawyer, Thomas Mesereau. The Jackson family contacted Thomas Mesereau to replace attorneys Mark Geragos and Ben Brafman, because Thomas had been recommended by Johnny L. Cochran Jr., who won the acquittal for, guess who? Yes, that's right, O.J. Simpson. Thomas had got Mike Tyson off the charges, but he was later convicted on another rape charge. Perhaps if Thomas wasn't so good at getting people off, Tyson wouldn't have got off the initial charges to go on and rape again. Thomas was also hired to defend Bill Cosby, who was found guilty of sex offences. Are you seeing the pattern here? Or is Michael Jackson the odd one out and is innocent? In my opinion, Thomas was and still is at the top of his game and worth every penny he charges. In all of this, there is one thing I believe Jackson was telling the truth about, and that is when he said that he would never hurt a child, and in a physical way, it seems he did not.
Throughout my life, I have only tried to help thousands upon thousands of children to live happy lives. It brings tears to my eyes when I see any child who suffers. I am not guilty of these allegations, but if I am guilty of anything, it is of giving all that I have to give to help children all over the world. It is of loving children of all ages and races. It is of gaining sheer joy from seeing children with their innocent and smiling faces. It is of enjoying through them the childhood that I missed myself. If I am guilty of anything, it is of believing what God said about children. Suffer little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of heaven. In no way do I think that I am God, but I do try to be God-like in my heart.
You know, predators don't believe that they're hurting children. Pedophiles believe that they love children, and they're acting out in a loving way.
From the statements of the victims, Michael Jackson liked to masturbate in front of the children and also to masturbate his victims and have them give him oral sex. Masturbation and oral sex wouldn't perhaps cause any pain, but anal sex would probably be different. Only James has said that Jackson tried anal sex on him, but James had told Jackson that it had hurt, so he apparently stopped and carried on with masturbating. In Jackson's head, he hadn't hurt any child, and he perceived that he had only been giving them pleasure. A number of young boys continued to visit Jackson, and they believed that they loved him, even though they didn't know what love was. Their feelings cannot be used against them. After getting away with sexual abuse in the first court case, Jackson started to act as if he was untouchable. He was right. Everyone that came forward and told the public about Jackson the abuser was thereafter automatically attacked by his fans, called liars, threatened with violence, and anything and everything about their lives that might be perceived as bad was dragged up. To be honest, if I was a victim of Jackson, I'm not sure if I would ever come forward to tell anyone, because of the likely backlash. How many people would have to come forward before people would start seeing Wacko Jacko for the person he really was, and not the person he groomed you, the public, to believe he was? Oh yes, he had the public fooled too. People have been sent to prison on less evidence than what was collected on Jackson. The police took photographs of Jackson's body during the investigation into sexual abuse towards Jordan Chandler.
I have been forced to submit to a dehumanizing and humiliating examination by the Santa Barbara County Sheriff Department and the Los Angeles Police Department earlier this week. They served a search warrant on me which allowed them to view and photograph my body, including my penis, my buttocks, my lower torso, thighs, and any other area that they wanted. They were supposedly looking for any discoloration, spotting, blotches, or other evidence of a skin color disorder called vitiligo, which I have previously spoken about. The warrant also directed me to cooperate in any examination of my body by their physician to determine the condition of my skin, including whether I have vitiligo or any other skin disorder. The warrant further stated that I had no right to refuse the examination or photographs, and if I failed to cooperate with them, they would introduce that refusal at any trial as an indication of my guilt. It was the most humiliating ordeal of my life, one that no person should ever have to suffer. And even after experiencing the indignity of this search, the parties involved were still not satisfied and wanted to take even more pictures. It was a nightmare, a horrifying nightmare.
The reason they needed to take the photographs was to look for specific markings on Jackson's penis, which were later found to match the victim's description. The other victims also said that Jackson would show them pornography. A massive collection of pornography was seized by the police and was listed off in court. To be honest, I'm not really up on US law, but in the UK, in child sexual abuse cases, there would be no settling out of court. It would automatically become a criminal case, and the accused would be going to the dock to explain their actions. There would be no option to pay the victim to not testify. In the UK, that is what is known as perverting the course of justice, and bribing witnesses is considered to be such. I can't but think that if Michael Jackson was just Joe Bloggs from down the street, the outcome of any court case would have been very different. We wouldn't see Joe Bloggs as a free man for a very long time. On his release, he would be put on the sex offenders register.
We won the case. It was important. The money is really insignificant. It's all about the healing. The money is symbolic. You know, of course, no amount of money is ever going to take away what happened. But in our system of justice, that's all they can do. And in the civil cases, I think, are particularly important with regards to sexual abuse. And that's because most criminal cases will not get prosecuted. Why? Because of the burden of proof. In a criminal case, in order to prove a child was abused, you have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a very high standard. In these cases, they're the classic he said, she said. And so you usually don't have objective physical evidence. What you have is testimony. And so if you just have an adult saying one thing, denying it, and a child saying another thing, there is probably going to be reasonable doubt, and they won't even get prosecuted. And the other problem is that the victim in a criminal case is not a party. They have no standing, meaning they are only a witness. It's the state bringing the criminal charges against the defendant. And so the state attorney's office or the prosecutors or the DA's office will decide what they want to do with the case without regard to what the victim wants to do. Because the victim, again, is a witness. So they have no standing, no power, no control, which is the worst thing. And so what happens oftentimes in these criminal cases, the families move forward and they are so frustrated and disappointed. So what I tell them, very important from day one, is that all you can do in a criminal case is report the crime and participate. And that's how our system works. And what that does is validates for you that, you know, a bad thing happened and you've done what you can do. But the civil case is very different, because in a civil case, the victim is the party. The victim and or their parents will make the decisions, how they want to move forward, what they want to do, and how they want to handle the case, and whether they want to settle the case or not. So the money becomes insignificant. It's the idea of the power and the control that they have to control the case. And at the end of the day, when they get closure on that case and they've been empowered, again, I think that's an important milestone on the healing process.
Jackson's family have always defended their son and sibling, and they continue to do so. However, as I was writing this, I came across an interview with LaToya Jackson. For those of you who didn't know, LaToya Jackson is Jackson's sister.
What kind of evidence do you have that your brother did in fact sexually abuse these young boys?
I want you to know that there aren't really any evidence. The only thing that I know of, and my mother has actually shown me these things, she's the one that was outraged and brought them to me, that were checks that were written to the little boy's parents. And there are 2 checks that I know of that she has shown me, and it's for a substantial amount of money. And she was outraged over it.
How much money, and are you certain you know what these checks were for? Let's say that Michael...
I don't know what they were for, but I know they were written to the parents of the little boys that would sleep over.
You're just assuming then that it's hush money. Did your mother ever tell you that this money was being given to the alleged the parents of the alleged victims to keep them quiet?
That's why I can't say that it's hush money. Apparently, it was given for some reason. I don't know why, but I do know that she was outraged during that particular time. This is around 84, mind you, and she would say things like, I can't stand this. He's nothing but a fag. I can't stand this. And I would say, Mother, don't say that. Just because you see a check doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean anything.
But basically...
And that's the way she took it. Now, to this day, she denies it because she has no support. In other words, if she were to go and tell the truth, Michael would drop everything and she would probably be out on the street. So she has to stand by in that way. But the only reason I'm speaking up is because I'm an abused victim, and I don't want to see anyone else hurt like that because I know what it feels like to be hurt.
But basically, I'm sorry, LaToya, I was going to say basically because of these checks shown to you by your mother and the fact that Michael, do you know for sure that he spent 30 nights with this alleged victim?
I have never, ever, Katie, seen Michael in the bed with another boy. Never. I have never seen him. I do know that he would have boys over all the time. One, of course, and they would stay in the room for days. Then they would come out, and then there would be another boy, and he would bring someone else, but never 2 at a time or anything like that. Let me ask you a question. What 35-year-old man do you know that sleeps with little boys and stays with them for a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and sleep in the same bed? I'm asking you this question because this is a valid question. It's very open. Because most people would say, well, this is totally wrong. It's totally unfair.
Yeah, most people might...
And, you know, what you have to remember is that Jordy, I do not know this kid. I have never met this kid. I know nothing about him. But at the same time, I feel bad for him, and no one's caring about Jordy. Jordy is in a very bad position. Even if it's not Michael, his parents have put him in a bad position. And there are a lot of Jordys out there.
Have you talked, LaToya, with your parents since making the statements last night in Tel Aviv?
I haven't spoken to my parents, no.
What's your reaction to what your folks had to say, LaToya?
My mother is very much aware of all the children that were there, all the boys that stayed there, and she is the one who always said that Michael, excuse my expression, but he's a faggot, and she would say, that damn faggot, I can't stand him. And that's what she would say all the time, and she knows it, and now she's denying it, and that's what hurts. But what hurts more than anything else is that if she knew that, then why didn't she say something about it or do something about it or get help because she felt that he was bothering little kids? I didn't understand the fact that he was bothering little kids. I didn't understand why the checks were written. She was the one who was trying to explain these things to me.
You claim
but
that...
now she's denying it and covering it up.
You claim that the reason your mom is siding with Michael is because your parents and the rest of your family are afraid that they'll be cut off financially from him.
He supports every last one of them. Jermaine lives in that house. His children lives in that house. Everybody lives there. He supports them.
You know, your mother also...
And I must tell you this, too, Katie. By the way, Michael and I lived at home from anywhere from 10 to 15 years alone without the other brothers because they married very early. They do not know the same Michael that I know. They don't know him whatsoever. And they never did. And when they would come over to the house, Michael would say, have them make an appointment. And I was the in-between guy, like a go-between. I would have to make excuses and say, well, he's busy, he's in his room. He'd run up to his room and say, I don't want to see them, I don't want to be bothered with them. And these are his own brothers. And I would have to make up excuses, and I go, Michael, but they're your brothers. I don't care, I'm busy.
Your mom also said that she thought your husband was a con man and a thug and accused him of beating and brainwashing you, and basically your folks say you're just out for publicity.
That's totally untrue. First of all, I don't need it. They also said I was doing it for the money. When you do a press conference, do you do that for the money? I think it's time to speak up and save innocent children.
Have you spoken?
No one has spoke up.
Go ahead, LaToya. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No one has really spoken out properly. No one has said anything about these children. And I think it's totally unfair. You have to ask yourself a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions to be answered and asked at the same time.
How many young children do you believe Michael?
Sorry?
How many young children do you believe Michael victimized?
I can't really answer that.
And have you had an opportunity to speak with your brother yet?
No, I have not. And I have tried, but I have not. I put phone calls in, but nothing has been returned. Absolutely nothing.
Do you think he'll be coming back to the United States, LaToya?
The problem is my parents, especially my mother, more than so my father. My father has no idea. My mother knows that I know a lot, and she's afraid of what I might say, as well as Michael, because they know that I know too much. And now I think it's time to put an end to all of this.
Do you think Michael will come back to the United States?
I have no idea.
All right. LaToya Jackson, thanks very much for talking with us. Perhaps you can come on and talk with us another time. Thank you, LaToya.
The reason I believe what LaToya says in this interview is true is why would she lie? What has she got to gain? I can't see that she would seek to gain financially or in terms of publicity, as she already has all of that. Another thing that leads me to believe her is why would she feel the need to lie about it? If you come from a big, famous and powerful family, and it comes to the attention of the world that one of your family is suspected of or has been engaging in sexual activity with children, and knowing if this is proven that your whole life could crumble, and because the family member accused is the bread, so to speak, and that without this person you would potentially have nothing, would you go ahead and go out of your way to stand up on live TV and lie and slander the family member in accusing them of these crimes? Or would you only go on live TV because you believe you need to warn people about this dangerous family member? Feeling so passionate about stopping the abuse with the possibility of ripping your family apart and destroying everything that you have built for yourself? To quote Judge Judy, "If it doesn't make sense, it's not true." And to me, it doesn't make sense for LaToya to lie about anything in her interview. It does make sense, though, for her to go through all of this to tell the truth about her brother. In these 3 parts, I have pointed out so many of the facts and signs that were out in plain sight. Who knows, people may start saying that I have spent all of this time looking into this so I can make this video to be put on my small YouTube channel. And yes, it will be going on my YouTube channel. But believe me, I'm not making any money from it. I actually started this open-minded, but the more I looked, the more I honestly believed that Jackson was guilty of the sexual abuse of children. Why has Macaulay Culkin never come forward, I hear you ask? Well, I'm going to answer that one for you. I'm not going to suggest that Macaulay Culkin is lying and that he was also a victim of Jackson's predatory behavior, because I don't believe Macaulay Culkin was a victim of Jackson at all. As I researched this and looked into the patterns of a child abuser, from what I could see, most of the children that were abused by Jackson were big fans. They already loved him before they met him, and they wanted to hang around with him. Most wanting to further their childhood career. In a way, they needed and wanted Jackson as a contact to get famous. That's something of a fault on the parents' side, because in most cases, the children met Jackson because it was the parents pushing their kids towards him. They were shy and vulnerable, and they were easy targets for Jackson. Macaulay Culkin was none of these things, and he was already famous and had no need of Jackson's contacts. He had his own money and didn't need Jackson to buy him anything. Macaulay was also far from being shy and vulnerable, being instead very headstrong even at that age. Macaulay Culkin is a sexual predator's red flag.
We have to cover it, so let's ask about it. What's the relationship that you had with Michael Jackson?
Had or have? I mean, it's
had both.
You know, whatever.
Let's go with had to
Listen,
have.
no, he's a good friend of mine, and he still is. I mean, everything that's going on, I mean, it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate situation for everyone involved, and you know.
How did you first get to meet him?
I first met him. He kind of called me randomly, like out of the blue. You're just kind of like, "Hi, it's Michael." And I was like, "Hey." And the thing
This was after Home Alone?
This is after Home Alone. I actually had met him before I was doing Nutcracker at Lincoln Center. I was playing Fritz, and he came backstage one day, and I actually met him very briefly. And he kind of recognized me because it was after I'd done Uncle Buck, and so he kind of mentioned something. And then he calls me up kind of out of the blue, and it's kind of just this weird random thing. And he was like, "Why don't you come over to my house?" And the thing is, I didn't react to him the way most people did. Most people like, Michael Jackson. And, you know, I mean, he was a god to people. And to me, he was, you know, I knew he was a pop singer, but beyond that, you know, I wasn't one of the fans. I think that's one of the reasons why we connected, was the fact that, you know, believe me, I call him a jerk all the time. I call him a fathead and this and that, you know, and he
brother
gets
knew
it.
him too?
Yeah, no, we all did. I mean, he was, you know, a family friend.
What
basically.
happened at the house? That's what all these things that people
You know,
are
that's
concerned
what's so
about.
weird, you know.
What did happen?
Nothing happened, you know. I mean, nothing really. I mean, we played video games, you know. We you know, played at his
Sleep in the
amusement
bed?
park. Well, the thing is with that whole thing is that, you know, they go, "Oh, you slept in the same bedroom as him." It's like, I don't think you understand. Michael Jackson's bedroom is 2 stories. And it has like 3 bathrooms and this and that. So when I slept in his bedroom, yeah, but you have to understand the whole scenario. And the thing is with Michael is that he's not very good at explaining himself, and he never really has been, because he's not a very social person. I mean, you're talking about someone who's been sheltered and sheltering himself also for the last like 30 years, or you know, and so he's not very good at communicating to people and not very good at conveying what he's actually trying to say to you. And so when he says something like that, you know, people, you know, he doesn't quite understand why people react the way that they do.
Why do you think he likes young people so
It's because the same reason why he liked me was the fact that I didn't care who he was. That was the thing. I talked to him like he was a normal human being. And that's what, and kids do that to him, because he's not, I mean, he's Michael Jackson, the pop singer, but he's not the god of, you know, the king of pop or anything like that. He's just, you know, a guy who's actually very kid-like himself and wants to go out there and wants to play video games with you.
Did your
and things
parents
like that.
encourage it?
They weren't against it. You know, it wasn't like they encouraged it or like pushing me upon it. It was just kind of like I wanted to hang out with him, and they were fine with it.
So what do you make of what he's going through now?
Like you know, like I said, it's unfortunate, and you know, it's a circus right now.
You think it's a bad rap?
You know, I think so, yeah. I mean, it's, you know, I mean, listen, like, look what happened the first time this happened to him. You know, if someone had done something like that to my kid, I would, you know, I wouldn't just settle for some money. You know, I'd make sure the guy was in jail, you know, and it just really goes to show, I mean, as soon as, you know, they got the money and they ran, I mean, that's really what happened the first time. And so, you know, I don't know, it's a little crazy, and I kind of have taken a step back from the whole thing, because it is a bit of a circus, and you know, if the same thing was happening to me, I wouldn't want to drag him into it, and vice versa. So I try my best to keep a distance from it, but like I said, he's still a friend of mine.
If they asked you to be a character witness, would you appear?
I guess so, but I probably not. I mean, like I said, it's crazy, and I don't really want to be a part of it, you know?
Would you like him?
I like him, and he's a friend of mine. I'm not saying I wouldn't do something like that. It just hasn't been brought up to me, and I don't think he'd want me to either, just because, like I said, you know, if the same thing was happening to me, I wouldn't want him to be.
What reaction has happened to you from all of this?
What do you mean?
I mean, people. How do people inquire of you a lot about it?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, you know, people always have like their opinions, and they always, you know, it's funny. I mean, people always talk to me about him because, you know, I'm one of these people who will tell you anything about my life, really, to get me going, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, I freely and openly talk about him and stuff like that. But overall, you know, he's just a good friend of mine.
But you wish him well.
If Macaulay Culkin had come forward and said that Jackson had abused him at the first trial, I am certain that people would have believed him, partly because of his fame and partly because he would have been able to articulate his case more readily. The other children would have been more easy to discredit, since their presence in the entertainment industry at that time was zero. So the one person the public would have believed was the very person Jackson was too clever to abuse. I also don't believe Macaulay Culkin had seen or heard anything to make him believe that Jackson was abusing the other boys that stayed with him. Jackson, it seemed, was very clever to keep all of them apart from each other and only ever abusing one child at a time, so if they ever spoke out against him, it would be only their word against his. People, well, Jackson's hardcore fans have been saying that James and Wade must have lied because their story kept changing. This was also another thing I looked into. Why would a victim of child sexual abuse find it hard to remember everything in the order it happened.
The reason it can be an important part is the way our memory works. So we ordinarily remember things in what's called a cinematic way, in sequence. If you think about what you did yesterday, you're going to remember things in your life in order, in sequence, like a movie. And ordinarily, that's how we remember things. When we're under a certain amount of stress, our brain actually enhances the memory system in that our brain releases adrenaline, and that allows us to actually remember things sometimes more clearer than if we were not under stress. For example, if I ask everybody, do they remember where they're at in 9/11, most people remember exactly where they're at. They don't remember what they had for lunch that day, but they remember where they're at when they heard 9/11 because that was a stressful event. And our brains are designed to help us remember those things for safety purposes, that we can remember those things. However, when we're under a tremendous amount, unnatural stress, our brain will release so much adrenaline that it actually interferes with the normal memory mechanism. So instead of remembering things sequentially, all of a sudden the brain is remembering fragments. And those fragments are like pinballs that are bouncing around someone's head that I believe cause a lot of pain and suffering in victims of sexual abuse. Being sexually abused is an extremely traumatic and stressful event. And for many victims, they'll remember fragments, particularly as children, even sometimes people assaulted as adults. It's so stressful, they're remembering fragments, not in sequence. And so one of the things that I believe is important for the healing process is to help victims take those fragments and put them in order. And that helps them begin to heal.
In my opinion, Jackson isn't the only one to blame in all of this. Jackson was unable to do all of this alone and get away with it for so long, without his personal staff and his parents being complicit in this very odd behavior from a 40-year-old man, and allowing it to continue without speaking out. By not speaking out, they effectively encouraged Jackson, not just in this, but by bringing children to him. This is very similar to the operation of a paedophile ring, but this one is on a major scale and endorsed by the whole world. All of the victims have the right to sue the Jackson estate. As one of my favorite quotes goes, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. This is what happened because Jackson had groomed the world into loving him, and everyone that could have stopped the abuse didn't. They chose to continue to say and do nothing. If I was a member of Jackson's staff, I would at least approach the parents and warn them to never leave Jackson alone with their child. I would not be able to stand back and say nothing and allow these poor children to go through this abuse. I have now come to the part where I was going to do a video on the evidence that shows that Jackson really was innocent of all of the accusations that were made against him. But all I have been able to find is die-hard fans saying that the victims are just out for the money. I'm starting to think just how many people would have had to come forward before people realized Michael Jackson fooled the world from the start and continues to do so now that he's dead. I don't blame the victims for trying to sue the estate. Jackson could not have committed these crimes alone, and there are many more people that could be held accountable in connection with his actions. As I wrap this video, my final thoughts are that all the signs were there from the start. It is so easy for people with the power of the public behind them to get away with pretty much anything. It seems to be the way of the world, and it has always been this way.